Welcome to Wide Angle. I am Uday Bhaskar. Today we are discussing current developments in Afghanistan. What are the major issues that currently animate Afghanistan? Much of it has to do with the Afghan presidency. The country has gone through a major election process to elect a new president, and as is well known, the election results have been both delayed and bitterly contested. The UN audit of the election results will now proceed with both the principal candidates, Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Ashraf Ghani, having withdrawn from the process. However, President Hamid Karzai is all set to step down, and reports suggest that he is in the process of packing up to leave the presidential palace. And last heard, he was carefully arranging for his precious personal collection of books to be moved to the new place that he is going to stay in. I suppose one can just infer that in certain respects, even presidents of nations are like most of us, particularly when it comes to precious books. But there is more to Afghanistan than just the election. What lies ahead? What is the role of the external interlocutor, whether it is the United States or NATO? And what are the implications for the region, and particularly India? As always, we have a very eminent panel to discuss all these aspects. Mr. Ashraf Haidari, the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Afghan Embassy in Delhi, Professor Gulshan Sachdev with the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Ambassador Jayant Prasad, till recently India's ambassador in Kabul. Mr. Haidari, if I may turn to you first, perhaps you could just give us a sense of what is the current status as far as the election is concerned, and what are the other issues that you think merit some kind of notice as we take stock of Afghanistan.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this debate. The elections in the first round took place on April the 5th, and the Afghan people overwhelmingly participated in that process, which demonstrated the maturity of democracy in Afghanistan, and it also demonstrated the consensus among the Afghan people against extremism and terrorism, in favor of institutionalization of democracy, peace, good governance and rule of law, and consolidation of all of our achievements of the past 13 years. Of course, none of the two candidates took more than 51%, and so the process went to a second round, which took place on June the 14th. Again, the Afghan people overwhelmingly, more than 7 million, turned out across Afghanistan, defying repeated terrorist attacks, so much that some Afghans lost their fingers, whose fingers were cut by the Taliban in the south and east of Afghanistan. They turned out to again cast their vote for some 8 candidates who had been campaigning hard based on issues, and of course discussing throughout their campaigns the issues that concern the Afghan people the most. And so the results that came out were not to the satisfaction of the two candidates, and the two candidates asked for the mediation of the United States and United Nations.
Allegations of fraud, that's one of the reasons.
Yes. As we know, elections in any country is a huge exercise. Even in developed countries, if we recall, elections in 2000 in the United States was problematic.
Yeah.
And it has been, I think, in other countries, even here in India. It is part of a democratic process that is very much dependent on functional democratic state institutions. And Afghanistan, of course, we've been in this process over the past 13 years. This means that democracy, began taking root in Afghanistan just a decade ago. and it takes many decades, many years for democracy to be institutionalized in a situation like Afghanistan. As a result, yes, there was some rigging of the election, which is part of the process, and we're also very happy that the two candidates have been working hard with each other and with the stakeholders that they have involved. U.S. and the United Nations Assistance Mission, whose one of key tasks is to help with this process to overcome the differences that they have, the concerns and the complaints that they have. And that's where we are, that the two candidates are talking as we speak to overcome not only the technical issues but also the political differences on formation of a national unity government on which the contours of which they agreed to with the mediation of the U.S. some 2-3 weeks ago.
Let me turn to Professor Sachdev. How would you assess the most likely outcome, because this is an election that has been bitterly contested by both the principal candidates? The UN is now doing, or the UN team, whatever they are expected to do in terms of the audit. But if you were to make a projection, 1 month from now, will Afghanistan have a president? A new president, I mean?
It looks like that we'll have a new president very soon, although it has been delayed. But if you look at the history of Afghanistan, in the last 4 decades, the country has seen various projects of socio-political transformation. Now, we had Soviet project, which ended with disastrous results, including 9/11. Then we had Taliban project, when Pakistan pushed theocracy in Afghanistan. In between, we had civil war. And since 2001-2002, we have this project, which is basically UN mandated project. Almost every country in the world has supported this project, and there has been significant improvement, achievement has been made. And now, as we know, when most of the Western countries, they have decided to move out. In that context, this post-2014 situation, these elections are very, very crucial, because as of most reports indicate, the country is going to face 3 major challenges, in fact 3 transitions, what they call security transition, political transition and economic transition. And today it seems that political transition is very crucial, and details have been told to us by Mr. Haidari. Now, to me it looks like today that we'll have a new government soon in place in Kabul, but the kind of gap what we have in the second round of elections, more than 1 million votes, to me it will be very difficult, even after invalidating a number of votes. It seems to me that we might have possibilities that we'll have Dr. Ashraf Ghani as new president. But already they have made...
I think we'll have to request you to hold that thought. We don't want to be accused of, projecting one candidate or the other, but I'm saying that in lighter vein. I think all assessment seems to be that perhaps,
Well, this is what, since you asked my assessment, because, it seems to me that it's very difficult to, clear the gap of 1 million votes.
Which was what had come up
what actually have been. So even if, a couple of 100,000 votes are thrown out in the process, so, but the good thing is that already both Dr. Ashraf Ghani as well as Dr. Abdullah, both are very mature
about the
they have been in the government in the past, and already they have made certain kind of compromises. They know the challenges ahead,
and I think they know what is at stake.
What is at stake? So in the next few months are going to be really very crucial. In fact, what I would rather see that I would see actually beyond this government, in a sense, because I hope that in the next couple of weeks we'll have a new government in place. But the major challenge is what they are going to face
will be the structural issues.
Because now, if the new government will be in place in the next couple of weeks, once the government is in place, then we'll also know the status of the bilateral security agreement between Afghanistan and the US
and the external players.
And in the next few months also, the remaining international forces also would be moving out from Afghanistan. So then this will be the real kind of a test, particularly for Afghan government and for the Afghan National Security Forces, and Taliban also waiting. So then they will really try to push, because so far what one has seen, they have been engaged basically mainly in the terrorist acts. But once I think this new government as well as the agreement with the US is in place, then perhaps they will try to make some territorial gains, and that will be the real test for the Afghan.
We'll come to that part. Yeah. But Ambassador Prasad, if I could request you now, having heard both our other panelists, how do you assess the next couple of months? The first question is, will there be a new president in a reasonably short time frame, and what happens after that?
There will be a new president, and it will be a president who has been elected by the Afghan people. And as you rightly said, we can't prejudge the outcome of the elections. But really the critical element now is political. The understanding that has developed between the two candidates, it's not impelled just by the personalities of the two candidates. Across the entire political spectrum in Afghanistan, there is expectations of the two working together. Afghanistan has had a tradition in the last 13 years of having an inclusive government. President Hamid Karzai's government, initial government when he was in charge of the Transitional Authority in 2002, was a big tent kind of government where all elements were accommodated, from the so-called Northern Alliance and every other segment of Afghan society. And both Dr. Ghani and Dr. Abdullah have worked together in that initial cabinet of President Hamid Karzai. They know each other well, and the political class in Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan and the new generation in Afghanistan, which has been nurtured in the revived universities, the new media that has emerged, all of them are pulling in that same direction of Afghanistan constituting what would be called an inclusive government once a new president is sworn in.
Let me turn to you, Mr. Hadri, if I may. Professor Sachdev spoke about three transitions: the security, the political, and the economic. I want to add a fourth, if I may, which is this whole question of gender. Because soon after 9/11 and what followed in Iraq, I think most of us came to this conclusion that it is perhaps easier to carry out the equivalent of a regime change, but rhythm change, the kind of socio-cultural rhythms that we associate with states, nations and regions are far more difficult to handle. Since gender has come up in a big way in most indicators, how would you assess the last 11 years, 13 years from 2001 or 12 years from the time President Karzai took over? What has been the progress on gender-related issues in Afghanistan?
I think the change has been transformational in Afghanistan as an egalitarian culture where, of course, while we're deeply religious, at the same time we are moderate. And given the availability of opportunities since the fall of the Taliban, who had subjugated and confined women to their homes, banning girls from going to school, women from working outside home, which in the 1980s wasn't the case, or prior to 80s and 60s and 70s, women were actively participating in the Afghan society, polity, and economy. Of course, not as much as one would desire, but given our least developed status in those decades, women were still active. But over the past 13 years, I think we have never had as many schools, health clinics, universities, private universities, as we do today throughout the
thousands of
Afghan
Malalas.
And so thousands and thousands of Malalas and thousands of Afghan Malalas who have been now going back to school, including across Afghan villages, because as you pointed out, that 60 to 65% of the Afghan population is below 25 years of age. This is a globalizing population, a population that is not stuck so much in the past, but a population that is looking forward. This is my generation who have seen nothing but war, a generation that wants to move beyond these conflicts imposed from outside due to regional politics, at times zero-sum games in the region, as well as international politics. Because
so on balance, you would say that gender has been a positive development.
Absolutely, more than 20%, 27% of our parliament are women, and they're, of course, in the government. We have a Minister for Women's Affairs that are advocating for gender equity and streamlining gender policy.
So I'm going to request you to hold that thought.
Yes.
We're going to take a short break and come back and then focus briefly on the current development index as far as Afghanistan is concerned and what are the challenges ahead. Keep watching. We'll be back shortly.
कुटी बस भी का नीचे आ जा। देख, दादी कह रही थी कि चोरी करना पाप है, पाप। अरे पगली, मैं दादी के साथ बैठ के सारे भगवान जीवों से एक साल माफी मांगूंगी। अब खुश?
घर बैठे बैठे कीजिए देश भर के मंदिरों का लाइव दर्शन टाटा स्काई एक्टिव दर्शन की कृपा से। इसको लगा डाला तो लाइव जिंगल आला।
शादी को तो थोड़े ही दिन रह गए हैं। गहने तो जी आप हॉलमार्क के ही लेना।
ये हॉलमार्क क्या होता है?
ये एक तरह से सरकारी मोहर है गहनों के शुद्ध होने की BIS मार्क।
तो ये गहने मिलेंगे कहाँ से?
किसी भी हॉलमार्क ज्वेलरी की दुकान से मिल जाएंगे।
तो क्या खोट बिल्कुल भी नहीं?
जितनी धातु गहनों को गढ़ने और ठोस बनाने में आवश्यक है, उतनी ही दूसरी धातु और बाकी सारा सोना।
हॉलमार्क सोने की शुद्धता की पहचान है।
जागो ग्राहक जागो।
मैं तो सारे मैसेज पढ़ूंगी। मैं नहीं देखूंगी तुम्हारा मोबाइल।
तू कब आया मोनू?
अब तो मोनू के कॉलेज वापस जाने का टाइम आ गया है। जब भी कॉलेज जाने की बात करो, इसका चेहरा उतर जाता है। कुछ तो गड़बड़ है।
नहीं नहीं, नया नया स्टूडेंट है ना, तो सीनियर तो रैगिंग करते ही होंगे। चिंता वाली कोई बात नहीं।
चिंता की बात है भाई साहब। रैगिंग जैसे गंभीर मामले को नजरअंदाज मत कीजिए। एंटी रैगिंग हेल्पलाइन नंबर पे कॉल करें और उनसे सलाह और सहयोग लें।
एंटी रैगिंग हेल्पलाइन नंबर 1800-180-5522 पर कॉल करें।
Welcome back. We are discussing current developments in Afghanistan. Having established that gender-related issues do show very positive progress, let's turn to some of the other areas. Professor Sachdev, if you were to look at the last decade and do a review of the trade, economy and other human security related indicators, how would you assess them and what would you identify as the challenges for the new president in this domain?
Well, you know, the last 12 years, as I said, has been a truly international project. So what we have seen is that more than 70 countries have provided, commitment of roughly about 110 billion US dollar for reconstruction project only. So as a result, there has been a very significant improvement as far as telecommunications. You have about 15 million telephone connections today in Afghanistan. In infrastructure, trade, economy, all these issues have been, very significant improvement has been made. But the fact of the matter is that the amount of money which was made available to Afghanistan in the last 10 years is not going to be made available in the next 10 years. Because even if there is a commitment from Americans, from European partners and even all the regional countries, they are going to be relatively very, compared to that, it's going to be very a less amount of money. And another major challenge is that all the achievement which has been made, can you sustain all the achievement in education, infrastructure, health facilities, everything. So the major challenge for the new administration is going to be first sustaining achievements made, at the same time with the limited amount of resources at their disposal, at the same time security situation is going to be difficult in whatever scenario you can think of Afghanistan. So whatever limited resources they are going to have, I think they will basically concentrate on the security aspect, security sector. So
those are two
areas. Since they will have relatively less resources, I think they'll have to concentrate on two areas. One, they'll have to really make an effort to attract investment into the areas, particularly in the mining, education sector, health sector, agriculture.
For which you need security.
Which you need security, but even, you know, its security is not that all over Afghanistan security is bad. There are certain areas where you can actually get some amount of investment. And secondly, as traditionally Afghanistan has been playing, it has to start playing again the, kind of a center of
uses geography in a more
geography for linking Central Asia and South Asia.
Let me turn to Ambassador Prasad. Two strands, if I could request you to pick up, Jayant. One is India.
Right.
The second is the political transition that we've all been speaking about.
Well, first, what has India been doing in Afghanistan? India has been trying to assist Afghanistan to stand on its feet and take its own decisions. Much of the development effort from the international community in Afghanistan, unfortunately, was led by priorities imposed by themselves, by the donors. And the most amount of money of the over $100 billion that Professor Sachdeva mentioned was actually spent through the PRTs, which are provincial reconstruction teams, which were adjuncts to the military camp offices of the allied countries that were dispersed in different parts of Afghanistan. There were at one point of time, besides 28 NATO countries, 20 other countries that had contributed token forces in Afghanistan. And so a significant proportion, according to audits carried out by the US internal auditing teams and the Senate mandated teams, show that contractors' profits and consultants' fees soaked up a lot of this money, which was not spent through the Afghan national government budget. So what we tried to do in cooperation with the government of Afghanistan, we had basically 4 areas in which we rendered assistance. One was humanitarian, to supplement World Food Program, school feeding program, by providing high protein biscuits which were distributed in 32 of the 34 provinces in Afghanistan. The second major thing that we did was to set up a large number of dispersed small development projects, which were typically under $2 million in value. These were schools, clinics, solar electrification, micro hydel, which provided quick and instant results for the community to see and benefit from. The third element, which is very important for Afghanistan, is Afghanistan will be able to stand on its feet only when it has functioning public institutions. So the human resource effort, the development effort was huge. And in fact, now all the Afghan universities are functioning. Mr. Haidari spoke about gender issues. You know, when the Taliban was in power, there were 1 million kids in school, all of them boys. Now there are upward of 8 million kids in schools, 38% of whom are girls. And in the universities, in several faculties, girls outnumber boys. So there has been a tremendous change there. We have just set up an agriculture university in Kandahar. This is the most recent effort in the human resource development area. And finally, we have tried to assist in some infrastructure sector projects. We have connected Zaranj and Delaram through that to the port of Chabahar, on which Iran, Afghanistan and India are going to work together to develop port facilities, so that the full advantage is taken of the connectivity that we have provided, giving Afghanistan a second viable option to the sea. The other really amazing thing that we did, and well on time, was to bring Uzbek electricity and Tajik electricity to Kabul, which was for 20 years known as the capital of darkness. We built transmission lines over the Salang Pass, higher actually than any lines that we have constructed in either of our 4 hill states in India. So this is the development effort that we have made. It's entailed an expense of about $2 million.
As ambassador, you had a very, I would say, busy schedule in ensuring all these. But can I just request you to hold briefly? If I could turn to you, Ashraf, having heard all the progress that has been made, what would you identify as an Afghan now, not so much as an Afghan diplomat, but as an Afghan national, what would you identify as the #1 challenge for the new president?
I think if you talk to any Afghan across the country, regardless of ethnic issues, which is politicized so much by external actors, which is not an issue inside Afghanistan, because we Afghans are all one, very united, and have, unified specific demands and requests, and that's to overcome the challenge of security. The number one challenge to consolidation of our achievements, which are transformational of the past 13 years in cooperation and partnership with the international community, with our strategic partner United States, with our strategic partner and close neighbor, traditional ally and friend India. Thanks to them, thanks to your people for sharing your bread with us. We know you have many problems, but you have reached out and helped Afghans because our security is intertwined as security. And I think that's the number issue that would concern the the new president in Afghanistan. We look forward. I think the two candidates are committed, both of them, to signing the bilateral security agreement with the U.S. and the status of forces agreement with NATO, so that they would
So
leave
if you
that
identify
force
security, Professor Sachdev, briefly, since we are running out of time, would you agree that security will remain the principal challenge?
Well, for the next decade, security is going to be number one challenge, but who is going to provide this security? So this is when most of the international forces are moving out. This is the Afghan National Security Forces. So strengthening Afghan National Security Forces is going to be the huge challenge, for which they will need obviously external help, both in finance and in all the equipments and training and everything else. So this is, I think, the responsibility of the international community, because this is going to be really the key challenge, providing continuing support to Afghan National Security Forces. And the second thing is that we also need to understand Afghanistan today is very different. Afghanistan of 2014 is not the Afghanistan of 90s or Afghanistan of 2001. So as a result, most of the analysts, what you will see, either so you take clue from the history, or just or particularly you analyze everything in the context of ethnic linkages. But Afghanistan is very different.
Ambassador Prasad, a brief comment about how will this security challenge be addressed? How would you qualify that?
This is, I agree with Mr. Haidari, the most significant and the prime challenge for Afghanistan, because it compromises the other legs on which a country has to stand, the political leg, the governance leg, the development leg. All of them are compromised because of the lack of security. And this huge international military presence, which when I was leaving Afghanistan in the middle of 2010 stood at 150,000, and the next year the Afghan National Security Forces were built up to a level of 352,000. So you had 500,000 men under arms then. Despite that, every succeeding year in Afghanistan,
saw levels
the
of
Taliban
violence.
presence since 2005 has become ubiquitous. They are now testing the Afghan National Security Forces in mass attacks, and the commitment of the international community, it's all right. I'm not a great votary of the presence of foreign forces in Afghanistan, because Afghans can fight,
look after their own security.
Look after their own security, but they must be provided the right
necessary
type of
assistance,
enablers, the mobility which they don't currently have. And the international commitment today is for less than 250,000 combined forces of both the military and the police.
That's the challenge, I think, in a very stark way. Afghanistan came into focus over the last 35 years for reasons that may be termed tragic for its people. First was the Soviet occupation in 1979, and then the post 9/11 US military attack to overthrow the Taliban. 13 years after 9/11 and the considerable resources that have been invested and lost, both human and material, the Afghan nation is at a critical cusp in its evolution. Will Afghanistan be able to turn the page and move towards a democratic dispensation, or will it slip back into bitter tribal and sectarian rivalries that will adversely impact the well-being of its brave and stoic people? One hopes that the valiant struggle of the Afghan nation will not be in vain. Well-wishers like India will continue to provide the support they can, but ultimately it is the will of the people that will prevail. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts and enriching this discussion. Thank you for watching. This program will be back soon.